हाय वेलकम बैक टू OLP सीरीज़। मेरा नाम मनीष है। इस सीरीज़ में पार्ट बी और ड्राइंग से रिलेटेड टॉपिक्स हम डिस्कशन करेंगे। सो लेट्स स्टार्ट। सो टुडेज टॉपिक इज लाइट एंड शैडो, and light and shadow is very essential for exam because usually the questions which are asked, there's usually a source of light is given in the question, and accordingly you have to create a shadow of the given objects and details in the question. So before we dive more into light and shadow, let's understand the basic concept of how light and shadow work. So for light and shadow, so we need few elements to create a shadow of anything, whether it is in 2D or in 3D shape. So first of all, we have light direction and the shadow direction. Here in particular, we're not going to talk about what kind of light are we talking about. Are we talking about natural light or local light? The application of light and shadow, the theory of light and shadow applies to both the scenarios. So let's look at how light and shadow affect the shadow of any object. So as I said a while ago, so we need a light direction and a shadow direction in which we want to create a shadow of a given object. Here in front of you, we'll take an example of a very cylindrical kind of shape, a pole, and there is a source of light which is denoted by this red color. And there's an object, a 2D shaped, a square shape placed in front of this light. And the light is coming from the top left direction, and the shadow is being constructed on the other side of the object. Always remember that whenever we create a shadow of any object, the shadow will always be created on the opposite side of the light where it is coming from. That is the first basic rule of understanding light and shadow. So let's look at some examples where it applies to 3D forms. So here we have an examples of some basic 3D geometric shapes derived from cube. So let me highlight one particular shape. Let's look at the first example. So it is a very simple shape where you can see the two surfaces, the top surface and the right surface. Here the light direction is been denoted by this green line, and you see the direction of light coming from top left corner. As I said that the shadow is always going to be constructed on the opposite side of the light direction. So we see that the shadow is being constructed behind the object. So let's understand that how does the light create a shadow of a particular object. So if you see here, as the green line suggests the light direction, so there is also a point called shadow direction, which is denoted by this blue line. Now shadow direction gives you the direction in which the shadow will be created according to the light direction. So for that, we need to first construct the light direction hitting the object at every point on the surface. In this case, you see that the light direction is hitting at each corner of this geometrical shape. And simultaneously, we have this blue color line which signifies the direction in which the shadow will be constructed. Hence, when we join these two lines, when these two shadow direction light, they intersect or they connect each other, that is the terminating point of the shadow of the particular object. So let's understand this through a practical drawing. So first, I'm going to take an example of a very cylindrical kind of shape. So let's consider this to be like a pole, and light is coming from the top left corner. So here I'm going to use sunlight as the source of light, and the light is coming from the sunlight or from the sun and hitting this object at various angles. As we know from the theory of light, which we must have studied in school, that light rays, they diverge in different direction. Now in order to find the shadow direction in which side of the object or opposite side of the light the shadow will be constructed, in order to find out, we need to identify the position of the shadow direction. For that, the shadow direction or the position of the shadow direction is always below the source of light. So if I draw a line from a source of light directly beneath on the ground, let's say the position of the sunlight with respect to the ground or earth is here. And this is just a random position. We can put it anywhere we like it. It's just for an example, to give a demo of the example that how we construct the shadow direction. Now this point on the ground, this is called shadow origin. Okay, so this is very, very important, which with the element, another second element of this shadow construction that we require. So let's first construct the light direction. So I'm going to extend this one ray of light which is hitting on the top surface of this pole and extend it as far as I can. So this, we have this, I'll just denote it as a light direction. Now in order to determine what will be the length of this shadow, I need a line, a reference line which originates from this shadow origin and intersects this light direction. So how do we do that? So we take a line and we take it to the base of this pole and extend it as far as we can till it intersects the light direction. So this is the point where the light direction and the shadow direction, they intersect. So this portion which I'm shading is the length of the shadow of this particular object. So this is the only step which you require to know. Nothing very complicated about this. Just you need to know the light direction and the shadow direction. One thing important to observe here is that in this scenario, when the light is just slightly on top of the pole, we get a very long shadow. The reason being that whenever the light is very close to the object, or per se we say that it is very low lighting, we always going to get a long shadow. So let's look at an example where the light is at a very great height. So I'm going to take the same pole again, and this time I'm going to put the light way above the object. Let's put it outside in the corner. So again, drawing a light direction which will hit on top of this pole, and below the light source we'll get the shadow origin. So stretching a line, creating a line from the shadow origin. So now we see that we get a very shorter shadow. So these are the two most important concepts you just need to remember. So where is the position of the light? Now this applies to a lot of interior drawing. So where in the question it might be given the light is coming from a window, or maybe there is a light coming from the local light, which could be a bulb or lamp, and etc. So you need to understand in which case the shadow will be constructed long, and in which case it will be constructed short. Okay. Now let's look at this example in form of a 3D object, because in most of the cases when we're going to draw in the exam, we're going to get 3D objects. So we're going to start with a very simple example. So we're going to use an example of a cube, and creating shadow of a cube applies to the product drawing. So here I'm taking an example of a 2-point perspective cube. So make sure that when you're practicing this, your cube is in perfect perspective. So again, taking an example of keeping the light source at the top left corner and a shadow origin. Now in this case, in cube, now we got 4 corners which is visible. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, and we got bottom corner here 1, 2. So the ray of light will hit on this corner, each corner. So let's construct a line. Make sure that when you are drawing this light direction lines, they're hitting at the right spot. Otherwise, the shadow which will be constructed will be slightly off. So let's take another ray of light hitting this far corner. Now from the shadow origin, so we're going to take a line which passes through the base of this vertical corners of the cube. So connect all the corners from the shadow origin. Now we need to find out where do this the shadow origin line and light direction, as I mentioned earlier, where they do intersect. Okay. So we'll take a corner by corner in order to find, because now you see there's a lot of lines being, crossing each other. It might be difficult to identify which is the right line. So we're going to start with the front corner, which is near to the light of source. So here we have this line here, the shadow, a light direction of this corner, and the corner below this vertical line, the base corner. So this is the line that is passing through. Now you won't see the shadow of this because it isn't facing the light. So the shadow will be constructed in the cube itself, which will not be visible. Okay. So we'll move on to the second corner. So let's move to this corner and this one. So this is our light direction. And this is our shadow direction. So they meet here. So this shadow direction and light direction line, they meet here. So this is the length of the shadow which we get of this corner. Similarly, we'll repeat the process for other corners as well. So we get this length of the shadow of this far corner. We just need to connect these two dots. So we get a shadow of this edge and this corner and this corner. Now let's go to the fourth corner of this cube. This is the light direction and it intersects here. So we need to connect all these 4 points because we also see the shadow of this edge also. So shadow which we get, I'll just highlight it with a cross hatching. So this is the shadow which we get of this cube, in particular this light scenario. Let's look at another example where the light is right on top of this cube. So I'm going to use the same perspective of the cube. So let's assume that the light is on top of the surface. So in this first example, if we construct this angle, so this is at a particular angle, maybe approximately close to 45 degree. Now in this case, the light direction is 90 degree to this top surface. Again, taking the same example as the example before. So light are going to diverge from this source of light and going to hit all these corners. And let's put the source direction or source origin of the shadow somewhere behind this cube. A similar construction which we had done in the previous example, taking a line from the shadow origin, connecting or passing through the corner of the cube in order to get the shadow. So you'll get this kind of shadow, which is like a square. So only in top lighting scenario, you'll get a situation where you'll get a shadow of a cube, particularly in cube, that it is going to be a square. In other cases, it is going to be like a different 2D shape or polygonal shape. Okay. So that's what you just need to remember. Other thing I like to add here is that here we are keeping the source of light on the left side of the page, and if you keep it on the right side, it is just going with the opposite of this of the result which we got in this example. So if you're going to keep the source of light on the right hand side, the shadow will be constructed on the left hand side. As I mentioned earlier, the shadow is always going to be constructed on the opposite side of the light direction. The same principle, this then can be applied to the products. So whenever you have a question where some products or details are given in the question in the drawing composition, so this is how you can use to draw a shadow of objects which are cubical in nature. or cubical in shape. Okay. So moving on to the second example. So we're going to talk about objects which are round in nature. So we're going to take an example of cylinder. So with cylinder, what you need to remember is that since it is a round object, the shadow also will be a round shape. Whatever may be the lighting scenario, in whichever direction you're going to put the light, the end result is always going to be a round or curved shadow. Like in cube, again in this we're going to have a light direction and a shadow origin. So here again I'm going to put the light source here on the top left corner and a shadow origin on the ground plane. Now in the case of cylinder, so we divide the cylinder, the top surface of the cylinder, which is ellipse in this case, into 4 quadrants. So which is, if you have seen the first video or the ellipse video, where I had mentioned the anatomy of ellipse, how they work, how they're divided into equal parts. So you have this major axis and one you have minor axis. So we're going to create a light direction which are hitting all these four quadrants at this on the circumference of the ellipse. Again taking a line from the shadow origin and make sure that you know which line it's going to hit or going to intersect with. So this is a shadow which you get. Okay. Now this straight line is actually this, because it's in 2D, so you get your in reality we know it's a round surface, but when you look at a round object in 2D, you will see a edge which appears like a straight line. So these two lines are actually the shadow of this edge which are appearing as a straight line. Now also we need to create the shadow of the top surface, which is elliptical in nature, as you see here in the drawing. So the shape will be completed, or of the shadow will be completed like a round object. So again we see that we get a very long shadow, since because it's low lighting and very near to the object. So this part, the curvature part which I have drawn, is actually the shadow of this part, originating from here, because this shadow terminates here of this quadrant, and of this quadrant the shadow terminates here, and from this point you see this part as a curved part. So that is the shadow that is being created here. So I'll just highlight it again with cross hatching. So this is how you construct a shadow of a cylindrical object. Now let's look at a second example in the cylinder. When we have now this is a vertical cylinder, when we have a horizontal cylinder. So what is the difference which we see in shadow construction of a horizontal cylinder? So keeping this source of light in the same angle with respect to the object. So I'm going to use the same source of light. So let's complete this ellipse also, so that we have this 4 quadrants. And another ray of light hitting on this side. Since you won't be able to see this ellipse, the back ellipse, the only light which will be hitting this will be on this corner. So again for this example, I'll just extend this shadow origin here and constructing these lines. So wherever these two lines intersect, the shadow origin line and light direction, so this line is the shadow of this edge, and we get this shadow because this is round. So the shadow of this edge is this one. Now if you look at technically, there are a lot of technical steps which we require to construct shadow of this cylinder, which from exam point of view, you don't need to know that technical knowledge. You just need to understand how the light direction and shadow direction they intersect to form a shadow. Okay. So you just need to understand only two orientation. One is with the vertical cylinder and other with the horizontal cylinder. And the last example which we're going to look at is of a cone. So cone, as we know, has a circular base and a round side body with a vertex. Similarly, again, going to take light direction. Let's keep it off the page here. So I'm considering that my light direction is coming from way into the distance. And let's keep our shadow direction somewhere aligned to the axis of this base of the cone. So again, this shadow direction hitting this, passing through this ellipse on this 4 quadrants. Now in case of cone, one thing you need to notice is that because since it's a vertex, so the shadow where it terminates, it's going to be a vertex kind of, like it's going to be like a triangle. Okay. So with a cone, you will always get a shadow which is always going to be a triangle. To make it more simpler, I'll draw another shadow without doing all this construction. You can just simply remember this step. Construct a shadow origin in any direction. So where those two lines intersect, just draw a line from that point with a straight line, which will give you the light direction. So you can do the other way around as well, specifically with this cone. So let's look at a last example. So let's take a small cone here. And I'm going to put the shadow somewhere more towards the viewer. So in this case, the light is almost coming from the top. So I hope you understood how the light and shadow works with the geometrical objects. And practicing this will help you to apply light and shadow construction of product drawing. So see you in next video.